Gentlemen, video 2 of the pre-Unit 1 portion here. We're talking about the second page of the study guide. Really, my goal here is to go through the 3 early groups that are going to have interactions in North America, Central America as well, I should say, the Spanish, the French, and the Dutch, and talk about their economic, political, and religious motives, and sort of give a sense of the different flavor of how things are going to go. Now, you're saying, where are the English? Where are the English? They'll be here soon enough. They'll be here soon enough. But at the moment, Governor, they're really busy, yeah? They got like tea and crumpet hour, and they can't make it. That's the way it is, Governor. They'll be here in a minute. Right. Okay, so the Spanish. Let's talk about New Spain. Right. The Spanish, starting with Christopher Columbus's arrival in 1492, are really going to be interested, and we're in the first column here, right? Looking down at the study guide, look down at it. There it is. Economic motives. The moment the Spanish realize that there are precious metals to be had, they are in like Flint. Okay? The Spanish are going to haul from the Americas thousands of tons of gold and silver, fabulous amounts of wealth. Okay? Now, the downside of that is they're going to do it at the edge of a sword, so let's not make it out to be like the Girl Scouts or something where they're making money and it's all nice and friendly. They are going to be there using the native workers as slaves in order to work the gold mines and the silver mines. But those resources make Spain the most powerful nation in Europe at that point. And so the Spanish are fiercely protective of their resources in the New World. They're not going to allow rivals like the English or the French or the Dutch to get in on that action. So when we see the other European powers founding colonies in the Americas, they're not going to find them right next to the Spanish, because the Spanish are basically going to say, you know, this is our area. We know that there's gold in the soil here. You go dig for it somewhere else, and good luck with that old enterprise. Government. The areas of the New World were pretty loosely governed. Technically, they belonged to the King and Queen of Spain, I beg your pardon. But most of the time, the governing was done by the local governors who had bought the right to do that from the Spanish throne. And in doing so, they guaranteed to give the Spanish throne a portion of the proceeds. It's like a license. You're buying a franchise of America. And you're coming to America, an area that, you know, could be unsettled, could be settled, you don't know. And you're going to go into that area on the hope that you find resources there. You're really gamblers. A lot of these conquistadors are the risk takers of the day. They're the entrepreneurs. They're willing to throw down money and their lives in order to see if they can find the resources. And some of them are going to profit hugely. By the time Cortez dies, he's the richest man in all of the Americas. Okay? But, on the other hand, there are others who are going to poke around Central America and Southern North America for decades and never find what it is that they're looking for. It's a gamble. The governing, though, is completely top-down. That is to say, the conquistadors hold power. And that power is absolute. The people are not going to be given the right to vote. There's not going to be any shred of democracy here. You don't see a lot of Spanish people, really, on the whole, coming out. The Spanish tended to settle areas in a very small way. The footprint is pretty small in that sense. So what does that lead to? You've got a lot of Spanish men in the area. There's going to be some mixing with the native women in order to, have families. So that tended to be pretty popular. You don't see a lot of Spanish women being sent out, unlike the English civilizations where we'll see the English women sent out to sort of make families in part of the Americas. That's not something that the Spanish are going to do. Religion. It's about Catholicism. And the Spanish saw most Native American practices as being barbaric. That's the polite word. Satanic would be a more harsh word. They did not want Native Americans practicing their own native religions, and they converted them, if necessary, at the end of a sword. They were willing to kill in order to assure that the native people bought into the religious beliefs of the Spanish. And so the relationship between the Spanish and the Native Americans is in many instances particularly hostile. Understandable. You, as a native, could be herded into one of these huge encomienda, or sort of plantations, or you could be rounded up even by the church members, the Franciscans who ran the religious message for the Spanish. You could be herded into one of the missions and forced to work there. That's not always the case. There are instances in which the missions are protecting the natives from the vicissitudes, if you will, of the Spanish conquistadors, but a lot of the time the natives saw all of that as being a particularly bad message. Now, do they fight back? Let's bounce to the bottom of the sheet just for a moment to talk about Pope's revolt. In 1680, a shaman of the Pueblo area in the southwestern America rose up against the Spanish. He did so by uniting together dozens of tribes of the area in order to say basically our populations are dying out, our power is going, we have lost all of our institutions and all of the things that we hold dear, and if we don't put our foot down at some point, then by gradual erosion of population or by disease, we're just going to get wiped out. We need to stand up. And so in 1680, they fought back against the Spanish and they won. They drove the Spanish away. 10 years later, the Spanish returned in 1690 and took the territories back. But even when they did, the people of the area reserved their right to practice their own religions, and they could not be forced into slavery. So in essence, they gained some autonomy. Why do we talk about revolts like that? Because it doesn't happen a lot. When we see revolts happening, it's a very rare occurrence. Okay? And so those sorts of events tend to be emphasized. Okay? The College Board, just on a side note here, the College Board, I believe, in my years of teaching it, I've come to think, loves the exception. They love when history is going in a trend and then there's something going against the current. And Pope's revolt is against the current. So emphasizing the rebellions and the revolts, I think, is a really important thing to do. The French. Now, the French are going to have a very different tack about this. Okay, first of all, the civilization of the French isn't in the Southwest, so they're not going to find gold. It is up in the Great Lakes and the river valleys of the United States and what is today Canada. Economic motives. The French are going to make most of their money off of fur and off of cod. Those two trades really are going to bring the most resources. And the French don't want a lot of French people in the Americas. In other words, they're not going to, I know this really isn't a word, but they're not going to people their colonies. They're not going to send out a huge number of French people to go and run the colonies. They're going to rely upon the native populations to do the work and therefore bring those goods, whether they be cod or fur, to trading posts where the French would meet them and then exchange goods. Pottery, cookware, knives, beads, alcohol, guns, you name it. We're going to trade for the resources that the Native Americans want, and in return we're going to get the fur. Now that economic motive sets up something about the government and the religious ideals, right? Because if you're going to rely upon someone to do the work, you had better treat them well. It is not as though the French could wait for the first Native American to come to the trading post, steal his goods, and kill him, because then the next guy's not going to show up. Okay, the French tended to be much more hands-off in that sense. The rule of the French was therefore much kinder, if you will, than the Spanish. That's not to say that the French are going to win the humanitarian of the war a year, because they're not. The French are introducing into Native American civilizations incredibly disastrous goods, alcohol, firearms, and by creating a growing sort of hunger for those things, they're going to drive Native Americans into greater conflict in order to get them. Right? If we show up and we're willing to give away X number of guns for the furs, then the Native American tribes that might have access to them might be willing to fight each other in order to get the furs to bring the goods to us. So let's not make the French out to be the good guys in this situation, because I don't think they are. But it's different from how the Spanish ran things. Religiously, they're Catholic, just as the Spanish were. But again, the message is much kinder and gentler. The French converted generally on a very gradual process. Instead of herding the Native Americans into missions, the French did their missionizing, or their religious work, in the tribes of the Native Americans. You had Jesuit priests who made their way up and down the Mississippi, the Missouri river valleys, around the Great Lakes area, making relationships and converting over time. And again, that makes for a friendlier face, if you will, for the French. The French are going to have a very, very small population in North America. In the long run, that's going to come back to haunt them when they go to war against the English in the French and Indian War in 1754. But for now, it makes for a friendlier relationship with the Native Americans. The last group on here is the Dutch. Now, if you know anything about the Dutch, you should know that they really believe that commerce is key. The Dutch are enormous when it comes to making trade. So economically speaking, what do they see the New World as? Well, it's the next great thing. And by 1600 to 1650, nobody in the world has a greater merchant marine than the Dutch. They are, in essence, the greatest trading country in the world, and they see America as one of the places that they need to be. Now, unfortunately, they're not going to have much of a population. Part of that is the fact that if you're a Dutch citizen, you live a pretty good life back at home, unlike the English, who are going to team out of England because they're starving and go to America in huge numbers. The Dutch have a high standard of living. Why leave? So most of the people who settled in New Amsterdam were actually English. And therefore, over time, the English sort of absorbed the colony from the inside out, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, rewind it back and listen to it a few times, and maybe it will. Okay. As far as government goes, you're going to have a local Dutch governor, but as I said, the population is largely English, so there are times where we're going to ignore that gentleman. And religiously speaking, if you know anything again about the Dutch, is that they're religiously tolerant. That's one of the reasons that they grew so strong, is that outcasts from other countries gathered in the Netherlands in order to seek religious safe haven, and in doing so, they brought their money with them. So the Dutch are not there to convert the natives. They're there to make money. It's a very short experience for the Dutch. 3 different countries, 3 different approaches to colonizing, all of them worthy of knowing. Part 3 coming soon.